Chapter 13. The Reluctant Bride. As our families got to know each other in the beginning of our courtship, which we were keeping quiet, Will's grandmother Gigi got word from Will's sister Ellen that her grandson was dating someone new. Gigi picked up the phone and said to Will, "Oh, so we keeping secrets from each other now, lover boy?" Or words to that effect. Will assured his grandmother that he wasn't trying to keep secrets, that yes, he and I were dating, and that we could all meet soon. The next thing I knew, Will had arranged to fly Gigi out to California within days so that proper introductions could be made. Before I arrived at Will's house at the appointed hour, he decided to have Gigi watch Jason's Lyric, which, by the way, included a very naked sex scene in the woods where I had a body double, as I adamantly didn't do nudity. Just imagine, I'm meeting my new boyfriend's beloved grandmother for the first time, and I walk in and she's sitting there on the couch, arms folded, shaking her head. She goes on to say that back in her day, it was different. Her point being, I don't know why young people feel like they gotta take their clothes off to make movies. Mortified, I smile, hug her as a greeting, and then gesture to Will to join me in the back bedroom as I say to his grandmother, "Excuse us a minute, Gigi." I couldn't believe he pulled a prank like that, and I was pissed. Why would you ever do that to me? What the fuck are you thinking? Babe, I promise you, this is gonna be funny later. It isn't funny. That's your grandmother. Do you see how she's looking at me? With that, I mustered all my diplomatic skills with some acting thrown in and went back out to Gigi, laughing like it was nothing. Till this day, Will and I are still debating whether it was funny or not. It was, however, a bonding experience for Gigi and me. From then on, I didn't have to put on any airs. I could just be myself because I didn't have anything to hide. Literally. Eventually, for the record, I did bring up the nude scene, telling her, "Gigi, you know that wasn't actually me on the screen." After which she just looked at me and lovingly shooed me away with her hand. Being close to Gigi gave me all kinds of Marian vibes. Gigi was an absolute joy for me to be around, and I loved absorbing her seasoned grandmother presence. Gigi always said exactly what was on her mind, my favorite characteristic of hers. During a subsequent visit to see us in California, while I was working on Set It Off, cast as a female bank robber, I was leaving for work one day when Gigi frowned and blurted out, "You look a mess. You always dress like an orphan." Before I could respond, Gigi continued, "You're a nice-looking girl. Put some better clothes on." I cracked up laughing and tried to explain, "Gigi, I'm going to work. I'm going to the set. I don't need to dress nice for that. I'm going to be putting on my character's clothes when I get there." She grudgingly accepted my explanation, but I knew she still didn't approve. I loved how Gigi loved Will. She was not caught up in any of the rah-rah of her grandson's Hollywood success. She wanted him to stay humble, yoked to God, and to abide by Christ's teaching. When that was in place, she applauded. We made frequent visits to see Will's family in Philly and my family in Baltimore. After growing up surrounded by the matriarchs of my own family, getting to know the matriarchs of Will's life came with ease. I had deep affinity for Will's mother, Miss Carolyn, a.k.a. my mom. She was real, solid, and strong. I greatly admired her grace, considering what she'd come through in her life, and how despite a challenging marriage to Will Sr., a.k.a. Daddy-O, and a subsequent divorce, she respected Will's desire to have both parents present for important events and holiday celebrations. A school board member and activist, she was passionate about education. My mom was always a beautiful example of what faith, strength, and patience could gift in this human experience. As for my mother and Will, she did a full 180 degrees on him. From first telling me not to talk to him because he was married at the time, a good call, and advising we not date because he was divorced with a child and that would be complex, to now declaring him the most wonderful guy on the planet. All of a sudden, Will had her in constant giggle fits. He could do no wrong. She just loved him. And when it came to having fun, they were two peas in a pod. The fact that our families embraced our relationship and embraced one another was a blessing in so many ways. It's not always a guarantee that families get along, and since family was important to us both, this was a shared core value that gave us a solid foundation not to be taken for granted. The timing for us continued to be complicated. It wasn't only that Will had not fully processed his divorce and that I hadn't recovered from either my breakdown or the wave of recent losses. Our careers were expanding rapidly. I was busier than ever, and Will had started to become a full-fledged leading man in films. Bad Boys had just been released, and he landed Independence Day soon after we began dating. Even though we had work to do on ourselves, Will proved to me that I could count on him amid a lot of tragedy. He offered me a safe space. We also had an undeniable chemistry that was beyond, and he had a way of helping me lighten up. My Virgo mind was often very serious and contemplative. Will, a Libra, would balance that with his ability to play and be silly all the time. His silliness is truly world class. It would drive me crazy sometimes, but when he got me, it was refreshing, like oxygen, an escape from this heavy time in my life. One evening we were getting ready to go out, and I'd gotten out of the shower, and Will noticed that I had missed quite a few bikini waxing appointments. Well, let me be honest. I had stopped going. You see, you're a guy, so you don't understand the pain of it all. I went on and on. While I made my case, Will was rummaging around in my closet. Somehow, he found my black knit hat with short little black dreads all over it. I had sat down on the bed to put lotion on my feet when I looked up at Will. There he stood in his briefs, hiked up into a Brazilian bikini fit with curly dreads from my hat sticking out like ungroomed pubic hair on all sides in a forest-sized bush. "So, you okay looking like this?" Will asked as he pointed to what he saw from his point of view. To this day, I have never been able to unsee him like that. For some reason, it's when Will makes fun of me with that level of creativity that I find his comedy unparalleled. That was clearly his wheelhouse, and it was disarming and frustrating if I wanted to be mad at him, because he could always manage to pull out a joke. Sometimes I refused to laugh, hoping he would see that he had chosen an inappropriate moment to try to be funny. This would prove a fruitless effort. Humor was an elixir he knew how to pour. He used his brew of intelligence to similar effect. Part of our dance of seduction was a tango based on a shared love of learning that led to intellectual banter that was hot. We could go toe-to-toe from sun-up to sundown, talking and debating about all kinds of subjects. We would find ourselves reading the same book in order to get the great debates going, whether it was the Tao of Physics or a history of God. We loved keeping each other on game. There is no one on this planet who can offer my mind better conversation than Will. We literally can and do talk for hours. First and foremost, we established a friendship that was at the center of our relationship. But no relationship is perfect, and the pace of our lives left little room for your typical honeymoon period. We were also plowing into a big life, and neither one of us had the emotional maturity to handle it. Yet the challenges created a bond that sat outside of romanticism, because things got too real too soon, and we had to figure out how to navigate it together. And in some ways, I clung to romanticism in my desire for Will to be my savior prince. A classic setup for us both. As a case in point, there was an incident that took place one afternoon, a short while after I more or less moved into Will's house in Westlake, though I kept my place in Studio City, along with my dogs. The pack had expanded to include 2 new Rottweiler puppies gifted to Will by Jay Leno. In addition to my daily routine with the dogs, Caesar and I met regularly, and he'd bring along his pack, which included his assistant teacher, Daddy, the most special pit bull I've ever met. We'd then work in a serious hike all together. On this particular day, we were far out in some remote hills. Caesar came upon a section of the trail where he remembered there was a natural source of water nearby. Instead of staying on the trail, he decided to go charging down a really steep hill with all the dogs. I went charging down after them, practically flying. Partway down, I lost my footing and rolled my right ankle, causing me to fall back on my butt and sending a sharp pain through my foot and leg. By then, Caesar and the dogs were out of earshot and nowhere in sight. My ankle was way too painful for me to stand on and get down the hill. Instead, I rolled onto my stomach and used the base of nearby bushes to help pull me back to the trail. Before long, Caesar and the dogs returned, and I leaned on his shoulder, slowly limping back to the parking lot to drive myself home. When I walked in the house, I found Will watching television. I sat down nearby to remove my hiking boot. The boot had provided compression to the ankle and acted as a splint, keeping the swelling in check. After I removed the boot, my whole ankle instantly blew up like a balloon. It was dark purple and hurt like hell. Given my habit to play down anything painful, I tried to white-knuckle it out of reflex, though I ran it by Will. "Can you take a look? I think I might need to go to the hospital." He took a quick glance and nodded. "You'll be all right." Then he went back to watching TV. Thinking he was probably right, I decided to ice my ankle and wait until the morning for the swelling to go down. Nope. The next morning my ankle looked worse, and it hurt really, really bad. When I went to Will and asked him to take me to the doctor, he had a conflict and wasn't able to do it. Instead, I called Dwayne. He took me. Sure enough, my ankle was broken. The doctor put me in a cast and sent me home. The broken ankle moment was pivotal, more than I realized at the time. Neither Will nor I was able to recognize the seriousness of the injury. My stance, and his, was if I'm not crying in dire pain, I must be fine. This attitude came from our upbringings. We were both hardened because of how we grew up, dealing with things far more extreme than a broken ankle. Neither one of us had been taught to slow down and take a good look when hurts came up. When they did come up, the mantra was, ignore it and keep it moving. Ignoring hurts in yourself or your loved one, by the way, can come back to create far worse pain. If you don't learn that lesson early, it's much harder to learn later. My misstep was being invested in the image of being strong and unbreakable. Will liked that. My strength was the comfort pocket. Yes, I was strong and fragile all at once, except I had no idea how to express the parts of me that needed a hug, needed to feel cared for, and that I mattered. Divorce, as I learned, is rarely amicable. It's brutal, no matter how much two people intend otherwise. Will internalized a lot of what he was going through. To his credit, he tried to the best of his ability to be a loving presence for his son, Trey, who was a toddler when his parents separated. As a child, Trey was brilliant, energetic, and confident with an irresistible sweetness. The first time I got to spend an afternoon with Trey, my focus was on creating an exciting, memorable outing. Where to? I thought and thought. Then it hit me. A candy store. I mean, what kid doesn't like candy? It was not just any store. This was a candy wonderland with every classic and new candy ever made, like Halloween on steroids. Trey's eyes were big. He was so happy. I let him pick out all the candy he wanted, and he went for a variety. The minute we got back into the car, I said it was okay for him to eat some of his candy, and Trey went for it. By the time we got back to the house, he was bouncing off the walls, jumping all over the couch, dashing through the house in circles. He was a completely different child. I stood in the middle of his zooming and thought, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? He is literally zipping around the house like the Roadrunner. I called my mother, a nurse, to ask for advice. Put him in a tub, was her immediate response. So I put Trey in the bathtub, assuming my mother's suggestion would work and the warm water would calm him down. Nope. Trey was going as berserk as before, in the tub. Finally, Cherie called to check in, and I reported what was happening and explained that he had eaten a bunch of candy. She interrupted and said, all matter of fact, oh no, you can't give him all that sugar. Makes him super hyper. I'm like, oh snap. Lesson learned. He eventually got the sugar out of his system and crashed into sleep. I never made the mistake again, but I felt pretty embarrassed. The first time I take Trey out, I get him on a sugar freaking high that's beyond anything I've ever seen or even heard of. Needless to say, it was also a bonding experience, not just for me and Trey, but for Will and me too. Apparently, I still had a lot to learn about how to care for children. I'm pregnant. Will and I are in bed in a rented villa in Cabo San Lucas. It's late summer, 1997. I am 25 years old, soon to turn 26, and Will and I have flown down to Mexico as a reprieve from work. We are both breathing hard in post-passion, and I'm feeling something that I've never felt before, and it's terrifying. Freeze the frame right there. Let's rewind to several months earlier. In February or March, Will and I were hitting our 2-year mark, and he was out of town working. Ever since I'd started dating Will, we'd enjoyed drinking together. So I was back to drinking a lot. I wrote it off as part of our means of having fun. But one day, I was given a reality check about how much was too much. I'd been hanging with my girlfriend Sidra at Will's house while he was away doing film promotion. We were drinking white wine and shared a bottle. Once she took off, I finished off a second on my own. I was going to get a third bottle when I stopped in my tracks. This thought popped into my head. I'm here drinking by myself in the middle of the afternoon because I'm bored and lonely. Jada, you got a problem. In that moment, I went cold turkey. No more drinking. For the most part, being sober felt good, clearer, more robust, more in tune with my body. I would have instances of seriously craving a drink, but they would subside. This happened to coincide with my realization that the birth control I'd been taking, the depot shot, had a side effect of depression. When the huge mood swing started, I knew it was time to switch to a different method of birth control. Thinking I was protected after my last shot, I wasn't concerned. As I wasn't menstruating, I assumed I wasn't ovulating either. That was correct, most of the time. My mother, an expert on birth control from her years as an OBGYN nurse, warned me, don't fuck around, Jada. How do you know that you just have gotten pregnant in the second when it happens? The best way to describe it is, if you've ever been into a bank vault, you know there's a lock that looks like a big round steering wheel, and when you turn it, it locks with a click. That's what it felt like in my womb. This is what I explain to Will after he gives me a skeptical look. And I repeat, I'm pregnant. He sits up. He's wearing an expression that says, you must be crazy. He starts laughing. Jump up and down, he suggests. Stand on your head. I am too devastated to respond. He calls Dwayne to continue his jokes about me believing I'm pregnant before the little ones have even stopped swimming. While he and Dwayne are joking, I'm crying. All night long. I can't stop crying. I am that sure I'm pregnant. My inner monologue is so loud, I'm sure Will can hear it. What the fuck have I just done? Technically, we've just done it. But being pregnant changes everything. It's not that I haven't imagined motherhood and lovingly bringing a child into the world. It's just that I wanted to plan first. 2 weeks later, I went and bought 10 pregnancy tests. This was not to be excessive. It was scientific. Fawn came over to Will's house. I set her up with 5 tests and myself with 5 tests. Every single test Fawn took was negative. Every single test I took was positive. Conclusion: I am pregnant. Without hesitation, I drove to the set where Will was filming Men in Black, marched into his trailer with my 5 tests, and lined them all up for him to see. He could clearly see that I was indeed pregnant and indeed right. Unlike the night in Cabo, he was not joking now. Not blinking an eye, he looked at me and calmly said, "It's going to be all right." The next call was to my mother, who listened quietly as I told her that Will and I were going to figure it out. Then she voiced what needed to happen. From some ancient place within her, Adrian spoke to me with deep concern. This was as the daughter of a woman who at 13 had borne a child she had to give up. This was as a woman encouraged to marry a violent addict rather than bear the shame of conceiving a child as an unwed 17-year-old. My mother decreed, "Jada, you have to get married." Adding to my confusion and fear was the onset of morning sickness, or all-day sickness. I was prepping for a role in a movie called Return to Paradise with Vince Vaughn and the late Anne Hesh. I'm sure I came across as distant or chilly because I could barely stand straight longer than 10 minutes without feeling like I needed to throw up. After a scene, Vince made a comment along the lines of, "Aren't you a peach?" I couldn't blame him. I couldn't tell anyone I was pregnant, except Anne, who was my homegirl at the time. I told her in confidence, so she got it. Frankly, I felt too lousy to worry about what other people were thinking of me right then. My big predicament was being too scared to get married, and just as scared not to get married. I was stuck. My trepidation had nothing to do with Will. It had everything to do with my long-held belief that marriage wasn't for me. Let's face it, my mother had 2 failed marriages already and wouldn't settle down until marriage number 4. And although both sets of grandparents stayed married for the entirety of their adult lives, their examples didn't convince me that what had worked for them would work for me. The one thing I was interested in was the level of devotion I witnessed with Marion and Gilbert, as well as with Shirley and Grant. Even with my desire to love and be loved in that way, I've been in the world enough to know how husbands and wives take each other for granted, far more than loving and appreciating each other. I did not want that, and I definitely wasn't ready to make a lifelong commitment under a spiritual contract with God. This was a shoo-in to fuck up. But I had always thought I'd have a child one day. It wasn't unthinkable that I could be a single mom or that I could have a close male friend co-parent with me. Why not? I had my own career, my own money. I could be a single parent if that's what I decided to do. These beliefs were as powerful to me as any fantasies of walking down the aisle in a white dress might be to someone else. Of course, all of this was hypothetical, until it wasn't. And I didn't feel ready. But it was becoming clear, now that I was pregnant, that with or without a piece of paper, making Will my husband, he was the father of my child. And that was sort of till death do us part anyway. Once I accepted that this tiny being inside of me was having her or his way and had chosen us as parents, I was able to listen to Will when he came to my side as I was resting on the chaise lounge I had put in his bedroom, just like Marion's. As I was lying there, trying to ease my all-day pregnancy sickness, Will leaned in and proposed by saying there was no way I was going to have a baby without him marrying me. All I could do was cry. His proposal was beautiful and sincere, but I was scared as hell. The next day, I went to Harry Winston in Beverly Hills and bought my ring, a nice-sized pear-shaped diamond set in a platinum band. By buying my own ring, I took some measure of control and sent the message to myself. All right, get with the program. A decade later, Will would completely outdo himself and buy me a 10-carat graphed diamond ring. But in this moment, I had to move quickly to make it all real and concrete for my psyche. The ring was a statement that said to my fear, get used to this now. My hard line, though, was that there would be no big, fancy traditional wedding. All I wanted was for me and Will to meet on a mountaintop, just the two of us, and someone to officiate the ceremony as we exchanged vows we had written under the power of the universal source that would be guiding this marriage along the way. Most important was to fortify our spiritual union. Years later, after watching the 3-day challenge on Amazing Race, I would concoct a more realistic idea for a marriage rite. What better preparation for couples than being thrown together in the wilds of the jungle? They would either discover they could problem solve as a partnership and overcome really challenging adversity, or realize they weren't built to run the race together. If you cross that finish line and look at each other after surviving in the shit together and still want to get married, go ahead and put on your white dress and call in your bridesmaids. 'Cause the jungle test is the ultimate marriage gauntlet. At the time, the mountaintop wedding was all I had. Will, as always, was hyper-focused on work and wasn't really paying attention to the wedding to be or not to be. He usually preferred to eventize special occasions, but he wasn't voicing any opinions quite yet. When I explained all of this to my mother, she was not having the mountaintop. Distraught, she said, "Jada, you are my only child. You have to have a wedding." This was a bridge too far. I don't want a wedding. I need to concentrate on what I'm about to get into. You are my only daughter. Though I tried to see it from her perspective, I didn't have the bandwidth. Putting on a wedding was hugely distracting when I felt we should be focusing on who we needed to be and what was needed for a successful marriage. I was sick, I was scared, and I didn't have the energy or desire to plan a wedding to do. But leave it to Adrian to plead her case to Will. After she cried her eyes out on the phone, Will took her side, assuring her he would indeed have a wedding after all. Even though he didn't need a big wedding, he did believe it was important to have a ceremony that would include family and close friends. When I called my mother, she couldn't contain her excitement about her conversation with Will. All I could say was, "You want a wedding? You do it." And she did. Gladly. Will and I chose the date December 31st, New Year's Eve, and plans were put in place for a small, intimate gathering in Baltimore where Will was filming Enemy of the State. In order to avoid an onslaught of media, details were kept under wraps. Our plan was to notify the guests of the location on the day before the wedding. My last living grandparent, Grandmother Shirley, was convinced we were doing this just to confuse her so she wouldn't come. Now that I was going to become Mrs. Smith, Will and I had several conversations about me kicking off Pinkett as part of my last name. People had suggested that before, including my mother, who told me early in my career, "You should go by Jada Karen." In both instances, I refused because I wanted to honor my grandfather, Grant Pinkett, the first man in my life who was devoted to me. I wanted the world to know I had been part of his legacy of love that had helped me get to where I was now. Jada Pinkett Smith had a ring to it. It was a keeper. As the day approached, my father made it clear that he wanted to come. I made it clear that I didn't want Robsel there. This may have seemed harsh, but it was all too much. Will heard me out. "So let me get this straight," I began. He gets to decide not to pay child support ever, to hardly keep in contact with me growing up, to decide when and how he wants to be in my life, but now he wants to be at my wedding? Will simply said that I would regret the decision in the future if I didn't have Robsel come. I knew he was right, but I needed to be heard. Underneath it all, I was more upset than anything that two of the people I most wanted there, Pac and Maxine, would be absent. It seemed cruel that they couldn't come and my father would get to show up. But at this point, I had to let it go and surrender to the powers who were in charge, Adrian and Will. That is until the day when Will and I were in Philly for the weekend visiting my mom. Will asked me to join him in the backyard. This was winter, and the leaves of the trees were gone for the season. It was a cold day, but the brisk air felt good as I fought waves of nausea. Will began, "You know, my team is thinking that I should get a prenup." This made sense, as he was freshly divorced and in the midst of paying alimony and child support, while also paying off a big tax debt. I paused and looked at Will. "Well, do you think we should get a prenup?" "I don't know," he answered simply and honestly. "What do you think?" "I think that if you don't trust me and you need to think about our breakup before we even get married, maybe we shouldn't get married. If we're going into this marriage with the possibility that divorce could happen, then I don't think we should do this." Will didn't say anything, so I continued, "I'm not going to start the end of our marriage in the beginning." Will agreed, without hesitation, and went back into the house. And that was that. It was within that exchange that a deep commitment was made, almost like we were making an inherent promise to each other even before we got to the altar. It was as if he was saying in that moment, "I trust you." And I was saying, "I love you enough that no matter what happens, we're going to work through it. Whatever inevitable challenges come up, and for better or worse, we are in this for the long haul." Our promise was a holy one, made without the intoxication of the fairy tale of a wedding ceremony. Was two people sitting down and being real and clear-eyed with each other, swearing an oath in front of God. In the end, I got the mountaintop moment I wanted, while he and Adrian got their wedding shebang. Everybody won. In years to come, it would be this conversation that would carry major significance for me, because no matter what, I would find it impossible to go back on my word given to him in that very sacred moment. Everything we would have, we would build together. That was a given from then on until this day. Without that agreement, divorce might have been a reality. But with it, we have saved ourselves from irrevocable strife on more than a few occasions. The wedding was held at the beautiful setting of the Cloisters in Baltimore, which reminded me of a castle with its old world enchantment. We had about 80 close friends and family. My dress was cream velvet, just like the dress Grandmother Marion wore for her winter wedding. Will wore a cream-colored suit that, like my dress, was custom-made by the designer Badgley Mishka. I did not have bridesmaids, but Fawn, my mother, and Aunt Karen also wore Badgley Mishka dresses. Other than all the media attention and hoopla, it was a very simple, down-home wedding. Adrian was beaming with pride at her accomplishment of being Baltimore's premier wedding planner. She was joined by the rest of my close family members, as well as my Baltimore homegirls, along with Light and Jasmine Guy, who had flown in. On hand were Will's entire family and his longtime friends from Philly, along with his Fresh Prince castmates. As shotgun weddings go, it was lovely, but we dispensed with all the formalities. Once the ceremony began, Will and I decided to walk down the aisle, hand in hand, toward Aunt Karen's pastor, Reverend Dr. Marvis May from Macedonia Baptist Church, whom we had met a few days before. A group Will was managing at the time, Trey Knox, sang the Jodeci song, Forever My Lady, a cappella no less, and Will's friend Charlie Mack swore he was going to sing She's Your Queen from Coming to America when they were done. That never happened, but our wedding was thoroughly hood, which I loved. For the most part, I had gone with the flow of the day, but as soon as we got halfway down the aisle, I was overtaken by emotion and couldn't stop crying. Straight up bawling. I was happy and sad, hopeful and scared, triumphant and uncertain. But what I knew was that I was going to give this marriage my best, and no matter what, I was going to give my child the opportunity to have the father I'd never had. After our vows, we all partied together and brought the new year in on a new beginning. And that's just what it felt like. A new slate. As soon as I said I do, and we were officially husband and wife, something instantly changed. Will was now my everything. My heart was completely surrendered. Hearing myself referred to as Mrs. Smith was surreal. And yet it was a symbol I could finally embrace as part of my new life. I looked at my family and friends and saw all the love surrounding us. I grabbed Trey's little precious self so he could cut our wedding cake with us. I realized that my responsibility to him was even greater now. He was no longer my boyfriend's son. He was my bonus son. And that's exactly how I saw him. As a bonus. There was a lifting of heaviness I had been carrying for so long. It felt like something old had died and something new within me came in. I felt at ease. It was almost like I had been standing on a cliff with all the anticipation of what the fall was going to be like. Now that I'd taken the leap, I felt as though I'd landed unscathed. My concerns were behind me, and there was a beautiful future ahead of me with the opportunity to create the family I'd never had. Done is better than perfect. Sheryl Sandberg. You want to know why there's no such thing as being ready most of the time? Because you can never really know what you signed up for before you dive into the experience. There will always be surprises, which is why it's a great gift when we learn to be adaptable and flexible. Life never fails to throw curveballs. You know what else? Sometimes the Great Supreme has a plan that is outside of the plan we have devised for ourselves. The Great Supreme makes no mistakes and often will bring situations our way for which we need to step up our game to meet the challenge. The trial is created to work in our favor, to help us to find the giants within. Trust that even if you're not ready today, it is in having the courage to go for it anyway that you will meet your own strengths. Is there any circumstance in your life you don't feel ready for? Can you let go of your need for things to be perfect before you leap? What different attitude could you adopt to be more ready for the lessons ahead? Write it down or record yourself talking it out. Take the dive. It's rarely what you expect, but it could be better.